So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Arts and Business Council, I wanted to just give you a quick introduction to our organization. My name is Jill McMillan Palm. I'm the Executive Director of the Arts and Business Council. And we're a nonprofit here in the Nashville area that help connect artists, arts nonprofit, and creative entrepreneurs with the resources, education, and opportunities they need to thrive from their creative endeavors. So through all the programs and services and investments that we do, we're just really trying to help you do your job better and make sure that you can have a thriving creative career or creative business here in Middle Tennessee. So we're really, really thankful to be hosting this workshop this morning and grateful for our partner Metro Arts being able to co-host this with us and helping us put this together on such short notice. So with that, I will turn it over to Caroline Vincent.
Hi, thanks, Jill. I'm Caroline Vincent with Metro Arts, and I would like to thank Jill and Jonathan, too, at ABC for putting this together really quickly. I know you all have a lot of questions, and we're excited that we have some really great experts here today to help. Metro Arts is the city's arts and culture office. We fund nonprofits and support artists in the community through a number of different programs. I encourage you to check out our website there that's listed in our socials to find out more about what we do. And again, if you are an artist or a small organization that is not already receiving grant funds from Metro Arts, please be on the lookout later today. We should have an announcement about some additional funds that are coming down the pike. So we're excited about that. We hope those of you that are listening in are hanging in there. We know it's a really tough time right now, and we're here to support you in whatever ways that we can. To get right to our purpose today, we're going to announce our speakers. So we're really excited to have Metro Arts Commissioner and Attorney Will Cheek, as well as his colleague Kierstin Jodway of Waller and Amy Bunton of Pathway Lending. They're here to tell us what's in the legislation, how it's going to work, and how to apply for these loans and relief. So thank you, Will, Kierstin, and Amy, for giving so freely of your time. We really appreciate it. It means so much to the arts community. I think I'm going to turn it over to Will to get us started.
All right, so I'm Will Cheek. I'm a small business attorney and do a lot of nonprofit work. I'm an attorney. My job is to try to translate some really complicated things into English. Kierstin is a labor and employment expert here at Waller. We're going to talk about two things. First is called Families First. It has an acronym FFCRA. It stands for, it's an awful thing, Families First. Families First is mostly about paid leave. The idea behind it is to keep people from going to work when they're sick. It is an incentive for people to stay home at this time. And then the second thing we're going to talk about is a completely separate act. It's called the CARES Act. The CARES Act is about loans and grants going directly to businesses and nonprofits, including arts groups. Under the CARES Act, the thing that seems to be galvanizing attention right now is something called the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP. This is a loan program through the SBA. Amy will tell us a lot more about that application process. And if you get the money and you spend it on your payroll for 8 weeks, the government will forgive it. And the devil's in the details here, and that's why we're talking to you. Kierstin, why don't you tell us a little bit about Families First?
Hi, everyone. As Will said, my name is Kierstin Jodway, and I am a labor and employment attorney at Waller. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act, we'll call it either the Families First Act or the FFCRA. What it does is it provides paid leave. It's paid ultimately by the government, but the employer has to front sort of the cost. And it provides paid leave to individuals who are out of work for COVID-19 related reasons. There's two provisions of it. There's the emergency paid sick leave, which is essentially 2 weeks of paid leave that you can use if you're at home because you have COVID-19. Employees can use it if they are subject to an isolation order, if they think they have COVID-19 and are going to the doctor, if they're caring for someone who has COVID-19, or, and probably one of the most common uses of it is going to be if they are caring for a child who's at home because their school is closed. So that's the first 2 weeks of leave. And then you have the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. And what that does is it extends existing FMLA leave and provides for 10 additional weeks of paid leave. Those 10 weeks, though, can only be used for employees who are at home caring for a child whose school is closed for a COVID-19 related reason. And so we just got 124 pages of guidance from the DOL this past week on that. Essentially, the way it works is an employee will request the leave. Any employer who has fewer than 500 employees has to abide by this law. There is a small business exemption that's potentially available to businesses with fewer than 50 employees, and happy to take questions on that. But so the employee will request the leave, the employer has to provide it. It is paid. The pay is capped at, for the emergency paid sick leave, it's either $511 per day or $200 per day, depending on the reason that the employee is taking the leave. And then the FMLA leave, those 10 weeks, is capped at $200 per day. So that's just sort of a general overview of the FFCRA, and we can go into more specific questions if that's what the audience is interested in.
So Kierstin, this is Will. So what if I am an independent contractor and I support arts groups, but I'm not an employee? Can I get unemployment under this?
No. So it covers full-time employees and part-time employees, but it's not going to cover independent contractors.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the CARES Act?
Do you want me to give a general overview of the CARES Act, or does Amy want to go into that?
Why don't you give us a general overview of it? Just a general overview of how it works.
Okay, so the CARES Act, what it does is it provides a potentially free money for businesses who are struggling right now for COVID-19. What it does is, so after the passage of the FFCRA, employers were like, holy smokes, we can't afford to pay all of our employees to not work right now. So we're gonna lay off all of our employees. And so then the CARES Act came along, and its goal is to incentivize employers to keep their employees. So regardless of whether the employees are working, employers can get this loan, use it to pay their employees, and then it is potentially forgivable. And like Will said, the devil is in the details, and there are a lot of details. Also, both of these laws were written in less than 1 week. Laws are not written in 1 week. That's just not how it works. But it is how these laws work. So there are so many ambiguities. We've been living and breathing these laws, and we still don't have all of the answers. So some of your questions, we're just going to have educated best guesses too.
Let me say on that point, if you're researching on the internet, posts from last week, like on Monday of last week, that would be, a little bit less than 2 weeks ago, are going to cover a completely different version of CARES Act because it changed as it was going through Congress. So be very careful when you're looking at advice online, and make sure that you've got a current source. Look at the date that it was posted. If it was posted last week, it's old information. So be very careful. Not only are things changing as we're looking at the law and implementing it, but the law itself changed as it went through the process, which is part of the reason why there's so many rumors about what is and what isn't covered. So today, supposedly, you can file an application for these SBA loans. Guidance was issued last night. Not surprisingly, we've heard that a number of banks are not taking applications right now. Amy, why don't you tell us a little bit about how the process is going to work once it gets turned on with your lender?
Absolutely. And there's a little bit of confusion in the marketplace right now. You can understand that because, as everyone said, this did come down so quickly. But there are two primary sources of SBA supported relief and recovery loans right now. And so I think Jill put some slides up. This is just a little bit about Pathway Lending. If you all aren't familiar with us, we are a local nonprofit organization. Our mission is small business lending and education. And that's something that we've been doing for quite a long time, about 20 years in Tennessee. So we're headquartered in Nashville and have representatives throughout the state. The CARES Act is a very important piece of legislation, but it's not the only way to get relief if you are a small business owner or a sole proprietor. So I'll take just a second and talk about the SBA Economic Injury Loan Program, just because that might be something that's extremely relevant, and then move to the CARES Act. So emergency disaster loans are something that SBA does just on an ongoing basis whenever a community has had a disaster. In fact, when the tornado hit, they declared that our region a disaster, but they've also declared Tennessee a COVID disaster area. So you can go on to the SBA website at sba.gov, apply for a disaster loan directly from the SBA, and their guidance says that they will issue $10,000 advances regardless of if you ultimately qualify for a disaster relief. So what happens in that process is they'll advance $10,000. If you are ultimately not qualified for more funding, that will convert to a grant for you and your business to use for business purposes during this time. If you qualify for more, you will be contacted by the Small Business Administration. They'll let you know how much you qualify for, and that is a very low interest rate loan, usually somewhere between 2.75% to 3.5%, spread out over 20 years. So
what do I need to do to qualify for that loan? What kind of business qualifies?
a small business, a 1099 contractor, sole proprietorships. So as long as you meet the SBA's definition of a small business owner, you can go on and apply today.
So I've seen a lot of chat about S corporate owners and LLC sole proprietorships. So that's something that they should really look into if their business has been impacted, right?
Quite candidly, given the volume that we're seeing with CARES, because it is such an easy application, I would go there first. Get that done. It's going to take about 10 to 15 minutes, and then move on from there to a CARES Act application if that's something that you need to do. Now, you can apply for both the disaster loan and the PPP CARES Act loan. If you're approved through the PPP, that advance amount of $10,000 will be deducted from that total amount. So we're not going to let you double dip, but it can come stages, relief can come in stages. So the payroll protection program, that's kind of synonymous with the term CARES. So people use that interchangeably right now. That is an application that you go through via a financial institution or a bank. There were some existing SBA programs already operating to support small businesses called 7A. And banks that were 7A lenders are the ones that are participating in this CARES Act Payroll Protection Program lending. So you need to call your bank first and find out if they are participating in the PPP program. If they are not, then we can provide a list. I'll give it to Jill, and I think she may have some resources as well as for financial institutions that we know are also lenders, so you can check with them. It's about a 2-page form that you have to complete. It's just basic information about your business or your entity. And then the payroll amount that you spend on payroll or payroll equivalent is really what sets the size of the loan. So you need to really make sure you understand what the definition of payroll and payroll equivalent is. And there's some pretty clear bullets about what's included in that amount. You multiply that times 2.5 months worth of that expense, And that kind of sets the maximum amount of a loan that you'd be eligible for under PPP. So once you're approved, the funds get advanced. And then as you and your business incur expenses over the next 8 weeks, those eligible expenses are what can be forgiven under the PPP program. So to share all that in words, I know sounds a little daunting. There's some fairly simple formulas that are out there with some small little online calculators and some resources like that that at least we came across last night that are pretty relevant. And I'll be glad to share those with Jill and any of you at the end of this.
So I know one common question that I've been getting. I log in and I file my PPP application and it says ownership. And I've checked I'm a nonprofit. That's on the page 3 of the application. So you'll notice that it says individual owner / agent. If you're a nonprofit, let's say it's Caroline Vincent from the Arts Commission. If she was a nonprofit, she would fill it in as executive director, and she would indicate that she has 0%. So we're telling people that's probably the best way to answer that question, and I know a lot of folks have had that question. Hey, Kierstin, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you calculate the amount of your payroll and how that differs slightly from the amount that's calculated on the grant side of it when you're paying it out? Because that's a little confusing.
Yeah, so to get sort of an estimate of how much you're going to get for the loan, it's 2.5 times your payroll costs, your average monthly payroll costs. And there are specific things that are taken into account, and there's a list of them. I don't have it memorized, but so you'll get that list, you'll do the calculations, but then in terms of determining how much how much of that loan will be forgiven, first you have to use your loan on qualifying expenses such as payroll, and then qualified rent payments and utility payments. And then if the organization lays off any employees or reduces salary by more than 25%, then the amount of loan forgiveness will be docked accordingly on a pro rata basis.
But one nice thing about this is if you've laid everybody off, you can go ahead and pay them now with that money. Is that correct?
Well, you can bring them back. So there's this like rehire grace period. If you've laid people off and you bring them back using this loan to pay them, then you won't be docked for it.
Right. And Kierstin, you don't mean actually drag them into the office and violate the safe stay-at-home order. You mean—
That's right. I don't mean that. Figuratively speaking.
So one of the best things to me about the CARES Act and the Payroll Protection Program is if you follow the rules, it is free money to pay your staff to do valuable work, or if you don't have any work because your program's completely canceled, it allows you to be able to pay people not to work. And that's the beauty of it.
I would remind everybody though that this is a loan. So if you don't have the actual amount of expenses that you think you'll need, then the loan converts to pretty favorable terms of 2 years and 1%. So just remember that as you're calculating it, it's great to get the maximum amount, but go ahead and think ahead about what expenses you're actually going to have if you want all of it to be forgiven.
Hey, Sam asked a question: rent, utilities, payroll, what else can you use the money for? I know you can pay your your mortgage. Is there anything else in there, Kierstin or Amy, that you'd want to talk about?
I believe it's mortgage interest only, not the principal payment. Depending on the size of your organization, if you offer up a retirement type supplement, some of the payroll tax expense that's part of the employer's expense, that can be included. So there's some very technical things that if your organization is of that size, I'd recommend you go a level deeper and contact Kierstin or Will, or I'll be happy to provide the legislation for that too.
Yeah, and I mean, there are things that you can use it on. You can use it on other things. It's just then it's to be forgiven.
That's right.
So Mark's asking, what if you're self-employed and have no payroll other than yourself? What do you recommend doing?
I think it's a function personally of how much your payroll is, and if you want to go through this process.
Mark doesn't have payroll. He's self-employed. So is there anything that he can do? Should he apply for the SBA emergency loan, for example? And obviously the payroll protection program is not relevant to him. Is that right?
As I understand it, if he is getting a draw or he's paying himself as a 1099, then PPP applies. Kierstin may have a different reading of that. I've seen people, depending on how much they pay themselves, just choose the EIDL loan because it seems to be a little bit more straightforward.
Kierstin, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like even if the PPP, even if you were eligible for it, it probably wouldn't be the best avenue because the amount of loan you can get is based on your payroll costs. And then there's these exclusions for people that make more than 100K. So it probably would not be the most advantageous relief option.
And so I will say, we have not had a chance to look through all the regs that were issued last night, and there probably will be more that come down later that might give some more guidance on these kind of finer points. So just sort of stay tuned and see if there's more information.
I did see some things whenever we were talking about the FFCRA. I saw some chat comments about unemployment. So I don't know if we're ready to pivot to that, but I just want to say that the FFCRA is different from unemployment, and the unemployment stuff you've probably been seeing in the news is part of the CARES Act. Amy's right, the Paycheck Protection Program has sort of become synonymous with the CARES Act, but the CARES Act is 880 pages long, and there's a lot in there. And part of that is the unemployment expansion, which I'm sure a lot of you are interested in. So
Yes, Kierstin, tell us about the unemployment expansion.
yeah, so one representative called it unemployment on steroids, which is pretty accurate. It's a huge expansion nationwide of what we've seen for unemployment rights. There's a couple things that it did. It expanded who is eligible for unemployment benefits. It expanded how long you can get unemployment for. Usually it's 29 weeks. This has bumped it to 36, or usually it's 26, now it's 39. And then how much? So it has tacked on an additional $600 per week in unemployment benefits, which is substantial because I think like the national average is somewhere in like the $200 and something per week in unemployment benefits. So some people will actually be better off on unemployment for a period of time. However, one thing that is getting lost, I think, is people not realizing this money, it is taxable. So it's not just $600. You have to keep in mind that you're gonna have to pay taxes on that. And when you file for unemployment, if you file for unemployment, you should be able to elect to have the taxes withheld from your unemployment if that's something you're interested in doing. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And then also, a lot of people are probably frustrated right now because they get on, if they're independent contractors or self-employed, they get on the website and right now they can't apply. You'll get the application, it'll ask you who your employer is and it won't let you put your name in. And so it's just not set up for independent contractors right now. You just have to be patient because Tennessee has not implemented this program yet and it's going to be doing so, but I don't think any states are already at the point where they're handing out these $600 checks and accepting unemployment applications from independent contractors. So be patient. Do we want to take some questions on the unemployment provisions? So I saw a question come through the chat that says, anybody know when it will be implemented? And I think that's probably with reference to the unemployment. No, but the Tennessee.gov has said on its website that it's working on guidance and to check back in a few days. I've checked back every day. They don't have anything yet. I believe New York is the furthest ahead on this, and they just, I believe yesterday, issued some guidance. So I would expect Tennessee to maybe have something early next week at the latest. I know that they're working overtime to get it done and get it implemented. I see some questions about whether someone has to choose between unemployment and the CARES Act, which I take that to mean, can I get unemployment and also get a PPP loan? I believe the answer to that is no. So for unemployment, you're going to have to show that you're unemployed and don't have an income. So if you're getting paid through the CARES Act loan, I don't think you're going to be able to get unemployment. Amy, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, here's what I was thinking. If I'm drawing unemployment now, in 2 weeks, I get PPP money, I think I become employed at that point. And
That's right. You have to certify on a weekly basis through unemployment that you're seeking employment and you don't have employment yet, or if you're getting paid how much. So you really have to, and just people are asking, what is PPP? Lawyers, we tend to use these abbreviations like everyone knows what they are. So I'm sorry about that. That's the Paycheck Protection Program, which is the loan, the potentially forgivable loan you can get through the CARES Act. That's the PPP. So yes, if the loan money comes in through the PPP, you would have to update through the unemployment website, and then they're gonna stop your benefits. And you want to be honest about that, because they're gonna be looking for people trying to game the system, and you do not wanna be caught doing that. They'll ask you to give back all of the money.
Yeah, it's a federal crime.
Yeah.
So I think just as a general statement, PPP, those dollars and those commitments, it's a first come, first serve type of situation. And there's only a limited amount of funds right now that banks can access the guarantee with from the federal government. I saw this morning that US or Bank of America has already received 10,000 applications. So I just want to make sure everybody understands this isn't an option that may be around for a long period of time. We probably have days to apply rather than months. So thinking about multiple options and kind of deciding a little bit early if you want to pursue the disaster loan and the unemployment versus trying to go the PPP route may serve you better. But I'd say you've probably got a couple of days to make that decision point, and then kind of the nature of events is going to take over with the demand for these programs. And that's just kind of what we're hearing from listening to what other financial institutions are saying.
And I've seen some questions with this, and Amy, you may be able to touch on this. I'm seeing a lot of people ask, so I have to choose between the disaster loan and the Paycheck Protection Program. That's not true, right?
That is not. You can apply for both, and both are open as of today.
And I've heard I know a lot of our attorneys and a lot of the people that are on the front lines with this actually encouraging people to go for both, because you can apply for both. You don't have to take both. Right? Is that right?
You do not. Although I will say when you do the disaster loan, those $10,000 advances are supposed to come automatically. It's not really an apply, get accepted, then you make a decision. It's apply. If you're accepted or not, they advance the 10,000. So the economic impact disaster loan or the EIDL loan is a very different animal than what the CARES or PPP Act is.
So I think what our collective advice is for the For the loans, we're saying you want to go ahead and apply. You want to get your name in the hat right now because that money's gonna run out. For unemployment, what we're saying is be patient. You want to apply as soon as you can. You want to try, what I'm saying is try every single day, but understand that it's just right now, I know as of yesterday, independent contractors, freelancers, whoever, they could not apply yet. So try to apply, but be patient on the unemployment.
All right, so Nancy Van Riesk has asked if we could give 2 to 4 scenarios with sort of step-by-step instructions for nonprofits, sole proprietors, and those getting W-2 and 1099s. That's probably a good question at this point because it's very confusing for some folks. So let's start with the 1099s. What are they supposed to do? Just a recap. Amy, what's your recommendation if you're a 1099 self-employed?
If you're a 1099 self-employed, I would recommend going to the SBA.gov website and applying for a disaster loan.
That's the EIDL?
That is the EIDL.
Okay. You don't qualify for PPP, right?
That is exactly, at this time, that's what everybody believes.
Okay. So I'm a nonprofit. What am I going to do if I'm a nonprofit? I've got payroll then, so I can get a PPP, right?
Correct. So the next step for that is to contact your bank, find out if they provide PPP loans, and go through that process. If they do not provide PPP loans, or then you need to look at some other bank options, and we'll provide the list of all the PPP/7A lender providers that you guys can look at this after today or after the call.
Right. And so if I'm a nonprofit and I've applied for the PPP, I can also still apply for the disaster loan, the EIDL, right?
I believe that EIDL is not open to nonprofits. I believe those are small businesses only, but I do want to check that. And my memory is just on that.
Kierstin, do you know?
Sorry, I was reading the chat. Questions, what was the question?
Can a nonprofit qualify for the disaster loan, the EIDL, or is that just limited to businesses?
I believe that's for nonprofits as well.
Yeah, I believe that's right. I just want to make sure. So I'm glad Kierstin believes that too.
Remember the EIDL, the disaster loan, has that really unusual provision. If you submit an application, which means you've got to roughly be qualified for it because you got to be able to provide the information to answer the questions. But if you push go and the computer takes your application, then you qualify for $10,000 right away, even if ultimately you're not granted the loan. So that's an enormous benefit, in particular for a small business. That could be the difference between you folding or not folding. We get that. Look at it carefully and see if you qualify. Don't lie on the questions. That's the one thing we want to encourage people. It's one thing if you can't quite figure out how to answer it, but if you know you're not, don't lie.
So I see someone asking, can you clarify, as a 1099 self-employed person, do I have to decide between EIDL and unemployment, or can you do both? I think, and Amy, feel free to chime in on this, I think what I would say is you can apply for both, but you have to be honest on both. So if you get the EIDL, I don't think you can be getting that money and then also collecting unemployment, because unemployment is going to be asking you what source of funds do you have. And so when you tell them, oh, I've got this large chunk of change from the EIDL, they're going to kick you off unemployment. So you can seek both, kind of with the PPP and the EIDL. You can ask for both, but ultimately you're probably going to have to choose. Is that your sense of it, Amy?
It is.
So here's a good question. I'm a freelancer, and how do I prove that I've lost wages? I'm going to put quotes around wages. How do I do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've had so many people ask that question. We don't know yet exactly, because freelancers have never been eligible for unemployment. So this is uncharted territory. And that's why we don't have guidance yet, because the states are trying to figure that out. Federal government just passed this law and said, okay, freelancers, you can get unemployment. And the states are like, well, shoot, how do we make sure people aren't gaming the system? Because part of your unemployment is a calculation based on your wages. And so for W-2s, that's easy for them to prove what their wages are, you know, relatively easy. But for freelancers, that can be more difficult. My advice right now is to look back at the last year. So unemployment in Tennessee is typically calculated based on, I'm going to say this slowly because it's confusing. The first 4 of the last 5 completed quarters. So what that would be is basically all of 2019. So I would start gathering all of 2019, you know, your tax information, bank statements, invoices, anything to sort of show your income over that last year. And you want, you know, to get as much information as you can, because at least with W-2s, the more you make, the more unemployment you qualify for. So someone who, it's a scale. So if you were making 6 figures and now you're unemployed, you're going to get more money through unemployment than someone who went from making minimum wage to unemployed. So just start gathering as much financial information you can to show what you made in 2019. And then you're also going to have to probably just self-certify. I don't know how you can show that you've lost business other than by showing maybe current bank statements. So just trying to request that information and get it together so that once you're able to get into the system, you can apply as quickly as possible. Do we want to take some of the questions that came in ahead of time? Jill, I don't know if you have those, or if we want to just go off the feed.
Yeah, so I'm kind of making sure we don't duplicate information we've already covered. I think there's still some confusion about where people should apply. I know we covered that the IDLs go through sba.gov, if that's correct.
Correct.
And then where should people go to find information about the PPP, or the Paycheck Protection Program?
For the Paycheck Protection Program, they can go to the U.S. Treasury's website. The SBA's website also has information about PPP, but those applications ultimately go through a bank or a financial institution. So go to your bank first. That's a good first step. And if they don't, then again, we'll have a list that you can look at for other banks that might. I saw a question pop up of, do you have to repay the EIDL loan? The first $10,000 of the EIDL loan, which is what you would be advanced, you do not have to repay. That is a grant. After that, you would have to repay it. And that's typically, they give you about 20 years to repay those. So it can be a very, very small payment amount over at a very low interest rate over a long amount of time. So that's a really good backup option for those that are looking for some things that might be a little bit more guaranteed than the CARES Act.
And under the Paycheck Protection Plan program, whatever it is, PPP, so if for some reason you don't qualify for the forgiveness, the grant piece of it, it's also a loan, but its payments are forgiven for what, like the first year? Is that right?
I believe that is correct. I know 6 months at a minimum, but it's an extended period of time, and then it converts to 1%, I believe, is the interest rate over 2 years.
So in other words, the PPP is also pretty good, even if you can't manage to pay 8 weeks of your payroll and you end up either some of it or all of it becomes a loan, you still don't have to make any payments for 6 months to a year. and then it's a very low interest loan.
That's right, Will.
Great. Thank you so much for clarifying. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat. One I wanted to ask, and then we'll get back to summarizing the options for self-employed folks. Multi-state income has come up. There were a lot of questions that were submitted, especially for touring musicians and folks that do shows in other states. So gig workers that are both 1099 and W-2 income in various states. What do you do? Do you apply where you live? Do you apply in the state where you worked and receive that income? How do you handle multi-state filing?
For unemployment, I'm assuming that that's an unemployment
Yes.
question.
Sorry, for unemployment, yes.
Yeah, so I would, that's an interesting question. My best guess would be to apply in Tennessee if that's where you reside. But you're gonna wanna, I hope you can hear me. There's a lawnmower going on in the back. But if you live in Tennessee, then I would try to file unemployment in Tennessee, but gather all of your income regardless of the source and where you earned it.
Great. Thank you for that.
And it looks like everyone wants us to go back to those
Yeah,
scenarios, Will, that we were doing.
Yeah. So let's start with self-employed Schedule C folks. No payroll, sole proprietors. What do you do in that type of situation?
I personally think that's probably a better economic impact disaster loan or EIDL loan application. I think that might be a faster way to get to where you need to be in kind of a more forgiving situation. But that's just my recommendation in terms of priorities.
So Amy, remind me, I don't know if we've actually said this. If I push go on an EIDL application, I put all the information in, and I actually submit the application. Do I get an ACH payment of $10,000 next day? How long is it going to take?
Well, the language says 3 days, but remember the federal government often works in batches. So the first people that I personally know pushed go on Monday night after 5 p.m. And I have not seen them. They haven't confirmed to me they've gotten that advance yet. So I'm checking every night to see if it's really 3 days or if it's 3 business days and it's after 5. So I'm going to say 3 to 7 days, depending on time of day submitted, business day, etc.
Okay, thank you. So that's 3 government days.
I think so.
Oh, and then here's another great question, follow-up for that. With that $10,000 forgivable credit, the first $10,000 that come, is that taxable or is that just a grant?
Well, I believe it will be granted to you in the essence that you won't have to repay it, but I believe that it will be taxable income in the end.
The same way if you get paid payroll through the PPP. I think that's right, Amy. It's money that goes to you. It's a payment. And so therefore it becomes income and it's taxable. However, it's not a loan, so you don't have to repay it. And that's the benefit.
Yeah.
And is there any guidance right now on proving that you've used the funds correctly so that that amount can be forgiven? You don't want to get into a situation later where all of a sudden they say now you have to pay back that credit.
Mm-hmm. I think it's all about the good basic business principles of keeping your documentation. So if you use those dollars for payroll, you'll have your payroll records. If you use it to pay rent, utilities, just keep those and maybe keep them in a little separate file or ask your bookkeeper about how you can code those a little uniquely. But I think it's just keep practicing your good basic business practices. And that documentation should be there.
So wait a minute. On an EIDL loan, are there any restrictions on what you can use it for?
It's really business operations, and that's broad, obviously, depending on what your business is, but it's for a business operation. So it can be payroll, utilities, rent, those types of things.
And when you say payroll, does that include freelancers that business is hiring?
Yes.
Okay, great.
And so if I have supplies that go into my business, let's say I'm an artist and I paint, that would be included. But if I bought a new couch, that wouldn't be included.
Probably not, but if you had a studio and you had to refurbish that studio due to some COVID-related reason, then that might be something you should ask your CPA or bookkeeper about.
All right, I hadn't thought about that, but I was just giving an example. There are personal purposes that you're not supposed to use the money for. As long as it's a business purpose that you can justify as related to your business, then you're probably safe doing that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Great. So are there other avenues of support that we haven't covered besides unemployment, PPP, or EIDL loans? Or are those the three big buckets of what we're looking at right now?
Well, I got an EIDL question. Can I use my EIDL to pay my mortgage? And I think I would be very careful about paying personal expenses, even though you might have a home office. I would recommend not doing that. Kierstin or Amy, what's your thoughts on that?
I feel like these really need to be business operating expenses that are pretty defendable and can be documented. But I also understand that as life goes on, we don't often think about ourselves in these bifurcated areas or these buckets. So while you may not want to take the dollars and put it immediately to a mortgage, you may think about what other personal expenses you're incurring that the EIDL funds can go for. So I think we're getting into an area now that you really need to think about what your unique business situation is and maybe talk to an accountant or somebody about your particular business because those lines get gray really quickly.
So I've seen a bunch of questions. Should I just open a separate bank account? And I got to say, from a practical perspective, the answer it doesn't matter. Even if you have a separate bank account, what you're really tracking is what are you spending the money on?
Mm-hmm.
So if I am a small business or an independent contractor and I deposit $10,000 in my normal business account, what really matters is I have to justify what did I spend the money on. I don't really care what bank account it's in. So I don't think sticking it in a safe bank account is really the answer. The answer is you need to track your expenditures and they need to add up to the $10,000 or however much you got loaned. And that's really the important piece of it. Same on the payroll protection. You need to be able to show that you paid payroll and benefits and anything else that's allowable there. You don't need to open a separate bank account to do that. It's a record keeping thing.
So a lot of questions about paying yourself as a business expense when you're a sole proprietor. Can you clarify that piece a little bit?
In terms of applying for one of these or how you justify
and how you use the funds. Is paying yourself counted as a business operating expense?
I think it really depends on what type of business you are and if you're set up and you're paying yourself as a draw or if you're paying yourself as an employee. So I don't know that I feel qualified to answer that question broadly. I think it may be more confusing for everybody that way.
So it may be a case-by-case basis depending on what the business is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Kierstin, do you have any instincts on that? I know you don't have a legal answer.
I do have instincts. I'm wondering if you guys can hear me and not hear my lawnmower. I mean, if you're a photographer and you're paying yourself, that's probably murky territory because you wouldn't normally be paying yourself for your photography. So I think, like Amy said, it's not a blanket answer on that one. It would be a case-by-case basis. And on these, you really want to be safe. You don't want to be in a gray area and on top of going through everything that you're going through right now, then be asked to pay back this money because you didn't use it properly. So that would be just my general advice on that one.
So I'm going to pick up on your photographer example. I am thinking that it probably makes sense if I think that I qualify for it, I can get the money. I just need to be very careful how I spend it. And perhaps until there's more guidance, I should hold off on paying myself since I don't normally pay myself. I get paid when I sell photography services. Would that be consistent with what you're thinking, Kierstin?
Yes.
So in other words, go ahead if you think you qualify for the loan or you know the disaster loan. Go ahead and get your application in, and if you get the $10,000, great. Stick it in the bank, and then wait for more guidance if you're not certain about what you can and can't spend it on. If there are things that very clearly you can spend it on, go ahead and do that. But if there are things that are questionable, why don't you hold off unless you're starving to death?
Yeah, or go the unemployment route. I mean, if you're, you know, I have a lot of friends who are musicians and they just don't have gigs anymore, right? And they have no idea when they're going to get gigs in the near future. And so my advice to them is to file for the unemployment, and that seems like the cleanest way for them to get some money in their pocket right now.
I know it's
Question.
been
Can
a
you
really
do
long week for everybody. It's hard to imagine that really it was just last Friday that this got passed and signed off on. And there have been a lot of rules that people have tried to interpret, and this is a really murky time. So I know it's frustrating for everybody. I think some of the things that we're trying to do at Pathway to help people figure out a little bit about your individual situation is we've got a couple of free workshops. So if you guys feel like you're still murky and you need a more personalized approach to this, you're more than welcome to go to pathwaywbc.org and sign up for a couple of our workshops. We've got one this afternoon and then one next Wednesday that might help. Because I know sometimes answering questions generally and broadly where we feel as the folks on the call today need to kind of be sometimes, that can be frustrating for you too. So I want to apologize ahead of time for that if you feel like this is murky, but we're all still trying to figure it out. There haven't been a whole lot of specific cases where we've seen what reality looks like. So we're just going to try and help guide you the best that we know how and how we read the law so far.
All right, so we're coming up with about 5 minutes left in the time that we have available this morning. I did just want to quickly say, we'll continue to answer a few questions here, but Metro Arts has a page of resources for emergency relief on their website, as well as the Arts and Business Council. And I'll go back to those information slides here at the end. The Arts and Business Council also has a program called Volunteer Lawyers and Professionals for the Arts, where we can provide free legal assistance to those that have arts-related issues, which we are expanding now to include culinary arts professionals, so those in the service and hospitality industries that have been affected by COVID-19 and the tornado. So if you have any questions, also, as Amy said, they're having workshop at Pathways. We can also get you potentially hooked up with a lawyer to answer your questions about these particular pieces of legislation or any other legal issues you may have related to your artistic or creative outputs. So I will put that out there. Metro Arts is also a really great resource for getting you hooked up with other relief organizations and other places and where you can go get information. We will continue to update those pages on our website with more information as we have it. Like everyone has said so far, this is a very quickly moving scenario, and we just don't have all the answers yet. So we're trying to provide them and keep everybody updated as best we can. So with that being said, with the 3 minutes that we have left, Will, Kierstin, or Amy, is there anything else that you would like to make sure we touch on before we close the webinar?
So Jill, let me just say one thing. This is very fluid. In other words, things are changing. What we said today may be different tomorrow. Some of it will be. Is it possible we could offer another one of these to update folks in a week or so when we have?
Absolutely. Let's do it again. Same time next week.
Okay, so then what I would encourage people to do is think about questions and really think about very precise targeted questions that might apply to a broader group of people. and get those into to Jill. And then what we'll try to do is get them in at least a couple of days in advance, and we'll try to answer some specific questions. And if there are updates between what's in place now and then, we'll definitely cover that.
Yes, we will set another time for this next week, and we'll do the same process. We'll set up the Eventbrite and have a place where people can log questions. Like I said, we got over 150, 200, some very broad, some very specific, which is hard to address in an hour because everyone has such unique situations. So we will continue to work with you all and make sure we're providing the best information that we can. So be on the lookout. If you're not subscribed to either Metro Arts' Arts Alert email or the Arts and Business Council's e-newsletter, please go to our respective websites and also follow us both on social media. That's where you'll get the first notification of another webinar or other information that we put on our websites for these types of things.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We really appreciate all you're going through, and best wishes with it, okay? Be well.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.